and welcome to your go-to Detroit Pistons podcast, The Pistons Pulse, co-hosted by me, Bryce Simon of Motor City Hoops and Detroit Bad Boys, a former D1 hooper, current high school coach, teacher, husband, and father of 3 amazing kids.
And I'm Amari Sacco for the second, Pistons beat writer for the Detroit Free Press.
And Michigan State alum, joined by fellow Michigan State alum and Michigan State fan, the best Detroit Pistons content, everybody's favorite, Laz Jackson from Detroit Bad Boys. Laz, man, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I'm only the father of 1 amazing kid, sadly.
Chance is the best. So, hey, I didn't put this on the outline because I didn't want you guys to have your answers ready. But Wes threw this out to me the other day. And I know, Laz, you follow the food conversations on the Pistons Pulse. Wes told me the other day that milk mixed with Pepsi is a real thing. And yes, Amari, and you better not justify it, Amari, because by that look on your face, you better not justify it and flip the script. Laz looks interested. So, Amari, I'm going to start with you. Milk mixed with Pepsi.
There's no script for me to flip for like milk and Pepsi mix. I don't even know what to say except no.
Just no. Laz, what about you? You looked somewhat intrigued, or maybe you're just so flabbergasted you didn't know what to do.
I wanted to hear the theory, but yeah, I don't get it. I don't see it. I'm thinking like a Pepsi float might be like kind of interesting, but like just milk, like no, that's probably a bit too far.
If Amari can't see the vision, there is no vision. That's what I've decided, because Amari finds a vision for everything that's come up on this podcast.
That's the most like Midwestern thing I've ever heard in my life.
I am contractually obliged, not really, but I am, to at least try to see the upside. And last mentioned milkshake, so you can have like a root beer float with ice cream and whatnot. But I think the reason why that works is because it's like sugar and sugar. So maybe if you have whole milk or something, I'm not going to try it. I don't even drink milk, so I'm not even going to.
At all?
Like, I'll drink it like cereal, but I've never been one to just like pour a glass of milk and drink it. Like, even when I was a kid, I was never just like a milk guy.
My mom made us drink a full glass of milk with every supper that we ate. We always had to eat the whole supper, and then we had to drink the whole glass of milk.
Omari, are you on the like undiagnosed lactose intolerance plan like everybody else?
I'm pretty sure I'm lactose intolerant. I'm like,
he doesn't know.
I'm pretty sure I am. I I don't really it doesn't bother my stomach if I just eat like mac and cheese or pizza or something. But like whenever I eat ice cream, I definitely get like some stomach discomfort. So I'm pretty sure I am. But I was just never one to like really just like the taste of milk that much. Like it's good, but like I like it more if it's like I eat a chocolate chip cookie and then you have milk to wash it down. Like that's good. I also realized later in life that the Got Milk campaign was just propaganda.
Straight propaganda.
Yeah, straight propaganda by Big Milk. Your bones won't be brittle if you don't drink milk.
Hey, ease up. I don't know how many listeners come from Southwest Kansas, how many of my people out here listen to the Pistons Pulse, but we are a big dairy farming community out here, so we need to chill on the Big Milk propaganda talk. So,
look, I love my dairy farmers. I have no issues with the Southern Kansas community. You know, they're my favorite people. I'm just saying for me personally, you know, the Got Milk campaign. I felt ostracized because I didn't drink milk, and then it was like, oh, it's propaganda. So that made me feel a lot better about it later on in life. So I'll just leave it there. I'm not picking a fight with the dairy community at all. I love you all.
This was perfect. This was exactly how I was hoping we'd start the podcast. So we got good vibes going. I don't mean to diminish them, but our Pistons have played basketball since our last recording. We brought Laz. We could do a whole food episode with Laz, and we will at some point. We got to do an off-season food episode. But let's talk about the Pistons. They dropped a not as close as the score game on Sunday to the Memphis Grizzlies. I want to talk about Saddiq Bey, Laz. He had 24 points, came off the bench. We've seen him go back and forth a little bit. The 2-point percentage is up, Laz. The 3-point percentage is way down. What are you making of what we've seen from Saddiq Bey in year 3?
The thing that's been surprising to me is obviously the 3-point percentage. And I was reminded of this earlier. Like, he struggled out of the gate last year for an extended period of time, right? He hit the game winner against San Antonio, and that kind of like turned his 3-point percentage around. Like, this wasn't supposed to happen, right? Like, he was up in the mountains training at high altitude. Like, he was supposed to come down like Rocky and Rocky 4 and just like decimate everybody. But like that has not been the case. I think a lot of it has been shot selection. We've talked a little bit about those like one dribble sidestep pull-ups. He needs to excise those a little bit from his diet. We talked about like the jab into the defender not moving at all because they're fine with you driving, even if you're going to go to the free throw line. And so I think he needs to just simplify his shot diet a little bit. And the role change has also been kind of interesting. I'd be interested to hear, Bryce, your thoughts about, whether or not the bench or the starting lineup is the right place for Saddiq moving forward.
Well, I mean, I don't know if I know what the right place. I think that's his ultimate role. So I guess if you want to go ahead and put him there now, that makes sense. And so I'm okay with it in terms of I think he gets a healthier usage coming off the bench because obviously Boyan's taking a lot of usage. Jaden Ivey's taking a lot of usage. Cade was when he was healthy, and we'll talk about Cade here a little bit later. Not the injury. Amari, still no update on Cade Cunningham. Can we get this out of the way?
No update on Cade Cunningham. I tweeted out the injury report and somebody was like, is there like a timetable? Like just remind people every now and then. But if there's no news tweeted out, that means there's no news. I'm not sitting on.
You're not sleeping on the job, Omar. You're not holding the Cade Cunningham injury news close.
I'm not sitting on like this Cade Cunningham injury news gold mine, and I'm just like evilly laughing to myself, like at everybody's pain. Like there's no update. He is, still in a holding pattern, and at the end of the day, it's an injury that's going to keep him out for a while. So there's probably not a pressing need for him to get the surgery immediately. So there will be an update at some point. Don't know when. We'll just have to see.
What's your insight into Saddiq Bey coming off the bench in this role change? Because like I said, Laz brings up a good question, and I don't feel like I answered it very well. I think that's the long-term play, but I don't think it was something that has to happen. Was it more about Isaiah Stewart getting minutes at the 4? Is that why there had to be a decision made in Saddiq coming off the bench?
Yeah, I think they want to do the 2 big lineup, and you probably don't want to play Bogey or Saddiq at the 2. I think they're both probably best at the 3 and then maybe the 4, and depending on who your 5 is. So, I think it was more of a question of do you bring Bogey off the bench or do you bring Saddiq off the bench? And Bogey, being the best shooter on the roster, is probably better served as a starter. So that leaves Saddiq, who has been up and down. And I know before yesterday's game, he was shooting 27% from 3. So just move him to the bench, maybe he gets more touches. I think he led the team in shot attempts against the Grizzlies, and maybe that helps him perk up. But I think the main, issue with Saddiq is that, whether he starts, whether he comes off the bench, I think he gets in his own head. And you hear all these stories about, Saddiq just being the hardest worker on the team. You have to lock the doors of the gym to keep him out. Him being in the Colorado mountains in like sort of a zen mode over the summer, a basketball zen, I guess, if you will. And I honestly think it just may be a case where sometimes you have a bad day at work and some people are like, I'm going to work harder. And Saddiq's one of those guys. And sometimes it's better to just go home and turn the PS5 on and forget about it. And,
like DeAndre Ayton.
Like DeAndre, yeah. And maybe Dwayne Casey just needs to buy Saddiq a PS5 and Modern Warfare 2 and God of War and just be like, man, just forget about basketball, go home, do something different, because it's not, this pattern just is not working. This is like year 2 of him kind of coming in and, he has more responsibility than he had in college, where he was more of a 3-and-D type guy in his rookie season. And we just see him second guess things, and he probably shouldn't second guess. So I think, as a coaching staff, you could say, let's limit his role a little bit. Let's just make him more of what he was as a rookie until his 3-point percentage gets back to where it needs to be, and then we can allow him to do everything else. But, I don't think you could put what's the saying? The toothpaste back in the tube or whatever. Like
I've never.
Gave him
is that a
role,
saying,
so.
Laz? Is that a saying?
That is absolutely.
That is not. That is not what they say.
That is a saying. Speaking of the PS5 player or person not player argument with Saddiq, Saddiq is the type of dude who's like openly said, I think, like I would play for free. It's like this current stretch like has me wondering about his contract extension, right? Like that is coming up in the not too distant future, and like him and Stu and Killian are all going to be up for extensions at the same time. Is like if this dude is coming off the bench, like if you're a bench player, you are not going to get as much money in contract extensions as you were if you were a starter. And so I don't think this is a problem now. I wonder if this becomes a thing that is a factor later down the line. Guys want to get paid, right?
So do you think Saddiq's not accepting of this role then, Laz? Because that's a good point, right? Like, because all these Killian all of a sudden, if he continues to play, and we're going to talk plenty about Killian, guys, and I know we have been, but we're going to talk about Killian as well. Stu, we'll talk about him also, but that's 3 guys you got to pay in one off season. So I don't disagree with you. I think there could be some of that at play, but I'm more of the mindset that I do think this is their long-term role for him. I do think they see him as a guy off the bench in general, but I haven't really thought of, does Saddiq think he's a guy off the bench in general, or is he accepting of that? What do you think?
I think so far he's been accepting. I worry about the future. Like if I were Saddiq's agent, I would be in his ear like, bro, like they're starting Marvin Bagley over you. Like this, maybe we need to start thinking about our long-term future here. But that's just me. And Saddiq does not strike me as the type of guy to agitate about his role, to agitate like about his contract. And so that is probably something that's going to come externally, but it is something that probably is still going to happen.
Okay, so we talked about Isaiah Stewart playing at the 4 and this kind of being the reason and the rationale behind one of the Saddiq or Bojan having to move to the bench. And I guess I thought about this too. Bojan starting raises his trade value as well if that ever becomes a thing, whether it's at this deadline, the offseason, whatever it is. How are you feeling about the Isaiah Stewart at the 4? Because I don't mean to speak for Amari, but I feel like the Pistons Pulse conglomerate feels pretty confident in Isaiah Stewart's ability. And Amari, I don't think your opinion on this has changed. So Laz, how do you feel about Isaiah Stewart at the 4 and what we've seen?
It's gone okay. You would hope for a better defensive lineup with Bagley and Stewart together. I remember we looked at it yesterday for our podcast over Detroit Bad Boys. That 2-man pairing has a 122 defensive rating. That's really bad. That's really bad. And if what Isaiah Stewart's mainly bringing to the table is his ability to both defend in space and impact the glass and like be a perimeter threat on offense and like find his way offensively there, but the defense is that bad, it's like, okay, well, maybe we need to start looking at some of the other pieces, but also like he's not performing or he's not able to like elevate perhaps the other people he's on the floor with in the lineup. I also like the other thing that's interesting to me is that like this is the transitory 2-big lineup. Like clearly the future 2-big lineup is Stu and Duren, right? And Duren is he's a similar player as Marvin Bagley, but he's better defensively, and that will presumably help the defense, which has been the Pistons' main issue so far. So I'm okay with it so far. Stu has been much better as a shooter than I ever thought he could be. James Edwards III is the only dude who thought Stu was going to be like a 45% shooter from 3 or whatever. But yeah, I've been fine with it. What have you been thinking about, like the off the dribble stuff we've seen a little bit lately more of, Bryce? I know that's the stuff you want to talk about.
Yeah, no, I mean, I guess that's the next step, right? Amari, like he's got to be able to put the ball on the deck and get to the rim and make some play. He did it. It wasn't the Grizzlies game. It was the game before where he did it a little bit more. I think there was like 3 possessions that I clipped out and he missed one of the layups. You know, maybe there was a passing angle there for him to pass out of it. He finished one, and one was like the typical Isaiah Stewart kind of like, it wasn't the prettiest thing, but he ended up putting the ball in the basket. I'll be honest, Laz, I've been encouraged. Omari, I know we both have believed in the shot. How have you felt about off the dribble stuff? I'm encouraged by it, and it's got a long way to go. Like, let me pump the brakes a sec. It's got a ways to go still, but we're starting to see some stuff that I think is encouraging as he continues to grow. Amari, I know you've tweeted about it. How do you feel about the off the dribble stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I'm buying into it. I remember we were in San Francisco back in January, and I think he had like 2 straight possessions, or 2 possessions early in the first quarter where he kind of took a guy off the dribble and just kind of had those coordinated finishes he has every now and then, and you kind of see it, and it's like he looks a little too good at doing that to think that it's just like a flash in the pan type thing. Like he does it enough to where it's like this is probably something he can continue to build on. And I think as his 3-point shot becomes more credible, which he shot it very well over the last month, we'll continue to see more of that because that's just an actual next step. Like once defenders close out on you take it to the hole, which the next step after that is him keeping his head up and, maybe finding shooters and whatnot, which, probably take, several years, if he gets to that point at all. But for me, there's a lot of 3-point shooting, fours who never get to the rim. Like you never see those flashes of, his footwork's pretty good and he can actually keep the ball on the string a little bit. And with Isaiah, you see it enough to where maybe it's not a priority in his development now, but I think long term he could probably get there. Like I actually buy into him being able to do that sustainably.
So I was thinking about this the other day. I don't watch enough Celtics games other than like when they play the Pistons. Is Grant Williams attacking closeouts in the way that we're kind of talking about wanting Isaiah Stewart to do it? Like, I mean, he very well could be. Can either of you, I don't know how much you guys watch the Celtics, probably about as much as me, but like in my mind, I don't think of Grant Williams doing that, but maybe he's doing it more than I realize.
I think they're doing it a little bit more this season. Again, like Grant Williams is also a dude who's up for a contract extension, and like that's the type of progression you want to see if you want to get paid. But also the Celtics offense has been more about ball and player movement than it was in the past season, right? You could tell during the playoffs sometimes they would get really, really stagnant, and I think they came into this season with the mission of like we're not going to do that as much. And so like that was also a thing that Grant Williams did a lot of in college, right? He was he was much more used as a ball handler at Tennessee. And so like, I think he's been able to do a little bit of that stuff this season for sure.
Do you think Grant Williams, I kind of thought, is he going to end up setting the market for Isaiah Stewart's contract a little bit? Is he now I realize Stewart's three-point shooting has to come to fruition and realization throughout the rest of this year and even next year. But I wonder if he ends up being because that's kind of the comp. That's a little bit of the role, right? I'm not far off here in terms of a four-man that can stretch the floor, do a little bit off the bounce, and then is super versatile on the defensive end.
Yeah, I think that's not a bad comparison. I was worried that when Keldon Johnson got his extension, that was like 4 for 90, if I remember correctly. 4 for 80. And so that seemed a little bit like high for Saddiq. That seemed aspirational, but it was a good number for Keldon. Grant Williams is definitely going to get less than that. Maybe Saddiq is a middle between those two guys. But yeah, I do think that Grant Williams is an interesting comparison.
All right, I want to ask about Marvin Bagley III as well, Laz. He got off to a little bit of a slow start this season. You mentioned him earlier. I'm not real sure where you want to go with this, but I have a feeling, judging by your change in body language here, you have at least something with Marvin Bagley III for us. So what are your thoughts on Marvin Bagley III so far?
So it was interesting to me that his blocks and steals were up for a hot second there, but that was really just flash plays, and defensively he's still just been kind of a mess. In his defense, I think his ideal role is to score 15 and 8 off the bench, and right now he's scoring 16 and 8 as a starter. And it's okay, cool. You are the placeholder until we feel comfortable starting 20-year-old Jalen Duren. But for now, I think he had the play yesterday where Job gets to the rim, puts it on the glass, gets the call, and it's off the glass clearly, and he
so
just blocks it into the row. It's just why?
Why?
Why? And and you see the processing stuff like that happen often, right? It's a step slow, or he's dropping a little too deep, or there's this one play that's burned into my memory from last season against the Celtics. I think the call was to hedge Jaylen Brown to his weak side, to his left, and he just kind of literally escorted Jaylen Brown all the way to the rim. And it's so it's hard for me to trust Marvin Bagley from a defensive perspective. So as long as I limit my opinion to what he's able to produce offensively, which he's been good, he's been good offensively. We're cool. We're cool.
Are you cool as a long-term backup guy, or you think eventually that $12 million salary gets part of a trade?
I think it's eventually part of a trade. Marvin being that bad defensively makes you explicitly the type of person who can't play in the playoffs. And if you can't play in the playoffs, I don't want you on my team when I'm a playoff team.
Omari, do you think we see Jalen Duren supplant Marvin Bagley III in the starting lineup before the season's over?
If Bagley gets hurt, sure. Beyond that,
that's not a fair answer.
Yeah, it is a fair answer. That's my answer. It is. Yeah, I think if Bagley gets hurt, we'll see him.
Not Nerlens Noel.
No, I think Nerlens is the what's the word Dwayne Casey used, the break the glass. Yeah. I think they'll continue to use him in that role. No, I think the thing with Duren is he's 19 years old. I think at some point he's probably going to hit sort of a rookie wall, just in the sense that he's playing more basketball than he ever has, and There's been a few games this season where I thought he looked a little winded early. And I would just be curious to see. I think everything Marvin gives you in the starting lineup just as a vertical spacer, a guy who can reliably get you a bucket, which this team never seems to have enough guys who can do that. And they just made a pretty big commitment to Marvin. I think we would have to see Durant make a pretty big leap defensively, for them to justify that. Now, if Marvin gets hurt, then that's one thing. But I think if Marvin stays healthy, he stays in that starting spot.
Well, that's an interesting question, Amari. Let me ask you this: do you think the shooting is for real? Because right now, he's a career 30% 3-point shooter. Right now, he's shooting 37% from three on the year, and in his last 6-ish, 5-ish games, he's shooting over 40% from three on low volume. It's if he can space the floor, that changes the dimensions of what he's able to offer offensively. If Stu is the floor spacing big, and Marvin is also the floor spacing big, does that change things? Do you think the spacing is real for Marvin Bagley?
I see him as more of a sporadic shooter. You have guys who, can hit threes every now and then, and you're is there something there? And then they miss their next 10, and it's no. I think he's always had touch for mid-range, and I think that's what, he's never been terrible at the line. He's not a great, free throw shooter, but he hasn't been like Ben Wallace, right? He's sort of credibly, you're not going to foul him at the end of games because he can knock him down at a high enough clip. So I think the potential as a shooter has always been there, and that's always been a swing skill for him. And, him, Isaiah, and Jalen Duren, they're always taking threes after practices, and that's a full part of their regime to get better. So I don't think I'm buying it yet, but I think he could still credibly maybe hit a three every few games, just, when teams leave him open. But, I don't know if he's going to start shooting them like Isaiah anytime soon.
I've always trusted the shot. I've always thought it looked decent, and, but I think I'm with Amari. It doesn't seem like the Pistons are as invested in him becoming that kind of 3-point shooter as they are Isaiah Stewart. I want to ask a question about Cade Cunningham before we go to break and then come back and talk about Killian Hayes. So me and Wes were talking about this, and so I want to preface it this way. When the Pistons are a contending team again, so again, when they're contending, they're good, whether that's 2 years, 3 years from now. I'm not saying they're the best team in the NBA, but they're contending. Is Cade Cunningham on that team more of the Chauncey Billups role or more of the Richard Hamilton role? So is he the facilitator that, yes, he scores, but he's more of the facilitator, or is he the number one bucket getter? Laz, I'll start with you. What do you see more of the ultimate role for Cade?
I think of him more as the Chauncey type. Chauncey was always in control of the action in a way that you hope Cade is able to duplicate. Chauncey was always really, really clutch in a way that you really hope Cade is able to duplicate. And I think with the roster as constructed right now, it makes a lot of sense for Cade to be in the Chauncey role and Jaden Ivey to be more in the Rips role, where, Jaden Ivey has your buckets for the first 44 minutes of the game, and then Cade takes you home, right?
So real quick, yes or no, do you think Jaden Ivey ends up being the Rip Hamilton in 2 or 3 years?
Oh, definitely. I think that's his ultimate role, yeah.
Okay, awesome. Omari?
Yeah, I figured me and Laz would probably have the same answer here. I see, I haven't seen the Chauncey comparison for Cade as much, but I definitely see shades in it. Just Chauncey's one of the most cool-headed basketball players I've ever seen. Down the stretch, he was always extremely sure-handed. Always made the right plays. Never got sped up. Never really seemed like the moment was too big. And Cade has a lot of that in his game. Then the clutch factor as well. Chauncey was called Mr. Big Shot, and we've seen Cade. I think we've seen Cade kind of take over games in a way that Chauncey never really did. When it was 2-minute stuff, Chauncey would hit big threes, but he was never just it's Chauncey Billups time, and I'm going to take this game over. But I think Cade, when he settles into his true NBA role, he'll be much more of a floor general than a Kevin Durant. I'm going to take this game over, from start to finish type of guy, which would leave Jaden to kind of pick his spots more like Rip did and kind of be more like that. Rip wasn't an attacker. He was more of a mid-range shooter, but I think Ivy would be much more of the Rip Hamilton. I'm going to be in attack mode all game and, lead this team in scoring and take on that role.
That's it. We all agree. I think if we did a poll, I think the fan base would choose Rip Hamilton. My just impression from conversations I've had is I think more of the fan base sees Cade Cunningham as like a 30-point-a-game guy that's the number one bucket getter. So, again, if you guys are listening, let us know. DBB comments, the Freep comments, Twitter, at Laz Chance, at Omari Sankofa, at Motor City Hoops. Let us know what you think. Omari, go ahead. Hey, at Omari Sankofa, he took a shot at Ben Wallace, Chauncey Billups, and I think Rip Hamilton in the last 2 minutes. So make sure you let him know about it. You did. I'm going to play it back for you. I'm going to play it back for you.
I didn't know such thing. That is a misrepresentation of my points here. I would say I think that poll would be heavily skewed by people who actually watched Chauncey Billups and people who didn't. I think you have a lot of younger fans who started watching kind of after the going to work era who, they may have like a different idea in their head of like what those guys did. But I think a lot of people who kind of watched that era would say, okay, there's not a Chauncey in them. And I would be curious to see if we have to do a second poll. Like, how old are you? If you're younger than 24, just toss those jokes out. If you're like older than 24, if you're like a Pistons OG, not like an OG, that's like the bad boys people, but like an OG, you're probably saying Chauncey Billups. Apologies to the younger people listen to the pod. I love you.
Again, that is at Omari, Omari Sankofa, Sankofa, for all of your complaints about the last few minutes from Omari. But after this short break, we'll come back and we'll talk some Killian Hayes.
All right, hey, Carlos, just a quick idea. How about if I say, hey, this is Sean Windsor, and you say, hey, this is Carlos Morales, and I'll go, and then we'll go back. You want to try that?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Okay, you ready?
Yep.
Hey, this is Sean Windsor.
And this is Carlos Monarez.
And we are the team behind Free Press Sports with Carlos and Sean, where we are going to talk about, you guessed it, sports, but lots of other stuff. Like what, Carlos?
Oh, we're going to talk about your favorite subject, Sean, food. Probably more food. Arts, culture, sports, TV, movies, you name it. If it's happened in Detroit, we're going to talk about it.
And sometimes we're going to have guests in who obviously know a lot more than we do about just about everything. But we're going to have some Free Press journalists to talk about big stories, folks from the sports world. We're going to be out every Thursday. You can find this podcast wherever you find your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts. We hope you'll join us.
All right, we're back with segment 2, and this is called the Killian Hayes revenge segment because I know Laz was, Killian Hayes guy going into the 2020 draft. I also, was like Killian Hayes guy. I really liked his tool set, especially in that draft, and there was like 2.5 guys guaranteed to be good NBA players, if that. Maybe it was 1.5 guys. Maybe it was only one guy. I don't know. But Laz, like, I want to bring you in and just what has it been like to kind of see this very abrupt turnaround from Killian in the last 3 weeks? Because I feel like it's not often we just see a guy just the lights turned on and they're just like, you know what, it's time to start killing, right? It's time to start going out and proving everybody wrong.
It's been really interesting because he's not doing anything a whole lot different than he was doing before. The shots are just going in, and the shot going in gives him license mentally to keep shooting. And so we're seeing an increase in like the aggressiveness that we were always looking for. There's still some holes in his game, right? And he's still not like a perfect NBA player. He's still only averaging, I think, like 12-6, 13-6, somewhere in that range, which is not enough for a starting guard. It's a good backup, which does seem to be his ultimate destiny, like on this Pistons team with Cade and Jaden Ivey in front of him. But like the playmaking has always been there. The defense, which I've been really encouraged actually that he's been able to add this additional offensive load and we haven't seen any decrease in his defensive abilities. Like he's blocking Ja at the rim twice. He's still like hounding guys, chasing guys around picks all night. Like that is really important and you like to see that. But yeah, it's been interesting to me that all he's just doing is just making more shots, which is all he really ever needed to do, I guess.
Laz, is this the player you saw? So I'll be honest. I've never admitted this on any podcast I've done. I wasn't even a fan of the Pistons when Killian Hayes got drafted. When I joined Motor City Hoops, I knew like 2 players on the entire team, and I had to go like research Sekou Doumbouya and Killian Hayes. Like I had no idea. I was not familiar with the NBA in December 2020. So I've come a long way in 2 years, but I have no idea what the scouting report was on Killian Hayes. I've heard a lot of people say they liked him. I've heard people say he was the number one guy in the draft for them. What was your thought on Killian Hayes when you watched the film, when you wrote your article for DBB? Who was the player? Because my impression it's not this 3-point shooter mid-range pull-up guy, but I could be mistaken.
No, it was definitely this mid-range pull-up guy.
Okay.
I think I said in the piece, his like natural NBA comp was like D'Angelo Russell plus defense, right? And Russell is a guy whose defensive limitations and like head-scratching decision-making has made him a worse player than I think like he otherwise could have been. But he was also a guy who was the number 2 pick in that draft. And so the star upside was absolutely there for Killian. The thing that like really stood out was he was a tall playmaker, right? And you always want to bet on those tall playmaking guards. But the thing that he was able to do in Europe that hasn't translated yet to the NBA was that he was like really able to attack the basket and finish around the rim in a way that like he hasn't really been comfortable with since he got to the NBA.
Do you think that's going to come? Because here's my Omari and I talked about this, and Omari disagreed, correct me if I'm wrong. I don't think either of you think he has to bring that around. Like he can, if he's just this 3-point shooter and mid-range guy, I think he can still be a really good player, even if it's an off-the-bench guy. Omari, how many times have we talked about these little guards who don't always end up being able to finish around the rim or get to the rim a lot? So I'll come back to you, Laz. Omari, do you stick to that, or you think that does need to come a little bit?
I think it's more of a reevaluation of what his ceiling is. I think that you don't need that to become like just a very solid NBA guard. And I think just with his passing and his defense, which gives him a pretty good floor, but you still have to be able to score in the NBA to play in the NBA. When you're 6'5" guard, it's just finding something that he can do with consistency so that you can play him and not essentially play 4 on 5 on defense. Or on offense, when the ball's not in his hands. I think that's a sort of a reevaluation of where we've got to come down from talking about him pre-draft, where, like, I don't know if I ever saw, like, Manu or James Harden ups. Like, I probably wouldn't have put money on him getting to that point, but it was just the overall tool set. You see a player who, over time could, really become a very, very good above average guard, if he did the things he did in Europe, which was we kind of saw the touch around the rim. And he wasn't like great at getting separation, but he was good enough. And he was also bigger and stronger than a lot of people defending him. And he didn't shoot well from 3 at all. But you kind of saw the footwork and you saw, his percentage at the line. And you just kind of see all these things that could potentially become something in 2 to 3 years. So it's more of a upside play. But I think we've seen enough in 2.5 years as far as him getting to the rim and then finishing, where it's like, I don't know. I think some things are just sort of inherent, to you as a player. And I think touch at the rim is one of those things. I think you could get better, but a lot of guys just don't. Like Fred VanVleet's been like a below average finisher at the rim since he got into the league. And he's also my height, so that's part of it. He's not 6'5", but, I think the bottom line with Killian is it's just more of a reevaluation of that's probably not going to come. So if you're not getting to the line now, then you definitely have to be able to shoot it, which is what he's been doing.
Laz, is it going to get better? What do you think?
I think it does get better because we look at where the shot was like a year ago now, and that has gotten a lot better. He's made some, technical improvements like to the way he shoots around to, get a shot in a place where he's comfortable with it. It's like, in my mind, there's no reason why he can't do the same for finishing around the rim. Obviously the thing that people are screaming at their steering wheels right now is that he won't take shots around the rim with his right hand. We saw last night even, they had Stu set the highway screen and he had like the open right hand laid up and he turned it into a left-handed floater and he still made the shot. But when you have a inability or a mistrust of your own capabilities to the point where you're not taking those easy shots, it's like that definitely puts a ceiling. But he is 21. Like there's no reason to think he'll never be able to finish a right-hand layup. We've seen him try right-hand layups more often this season than we have in the past. But you can also tell he's not really comfortable with it, right? Like he busted it out, I think, in transition in like Sacramento, and it got like blocked into the third row. And so like you just hope that that's 2 off seasons was fixing the shot. Maybe it takes 2 off seasons to fix the finishing package, but by that time he'll be 24, and you'll still have another 6-7 years of NBA runway in front of you as a complete, like, relatively adequate, like, 3-level NBA scorer.
Asking him to be a 3-level scorer on top of everything else he does, like, I'm okay with the 2-level score. If he can shoot threes at 40%, and I don't know that he's going to be a career 40% guy, but the ones he's the shot looks good. Like, I watched him make 2 last night, and I realized that game was a blowout, but I'm like, that looks really fluid, in rhythm. I trust him to make an open 3 about as much as anybody after Boyan and Alec Burks right now, to be honest with you. The mid-range pull-up looks supremely confident, and I know it's not the most efficient shot. Like, as an analytics guy, sometimes it drives me crazy, but still, and he can get to 7 or 8 feet, that's still forcing the defense to help. So, like, that's my thing. He's not getting all the way to the rim, but if he's getting into the lane, that's going to draw help, or he's going to shoot wide open 12-footers, which he's going to knock down more often than not. So I'm just saying, yes, you want every guy to be a 3-level scorer, but he's a good passer. He's a good defender. I mean, if it's only 2 levels, it's okay, I guess is my thing. And I'm not trying to cap it. Don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to cap it. I'm just saying it's not the end of the world if it doesn't come.
Well, the third level, I guess, is the difference between, like, I am a good backup NBA guard
And a starter.
and I am a starting level NBA guard.
1,000%.
Right?
I agree with that 1,000%.
Yeah. And we're seeing now that I think the other thing that is part of the reason why we're seeing this, like, resurgence from Killian is that he's finally playing his natural position, right? He's not playing off of Cade. Like, he's comfortable giving the ball up to Jaden and running the offense from there. But, like, he is getting to direct the flow of things. Like, he is getting to run a lot of the offense. And so I think it's like as his confidence is growing and, like, as he's doing what he thinks he's capable of doing, and you add to that, like, another 3rd level of scoring, like, who's to say he can't be at this point, like, a lower tier NBA, like, starting guard? I'm thinking like Spencer Dinwiddie, right? Like, Spencer Dinwiddie's like the 25th best point guard in the NBA. You're not like mad Spencer Dinwiddie is your starting point guard, but he's also, like, not a max dude, and, like, that's okay.
Yeah, and Killian, another thing with Killian as well, one, I'll say his defense, I think he emerged as a really, really good defender, probably a lot quicker than some people would have guessed. So that definitely offsets the concerns at the rim is, well, he could hound John Morant. Like, a lot of guys can't do that. So, that's pretty valuable. Just going back to what we talked about with Marvin earlier about he probably can't play in the playoffs. Killian can't play in the playoffs. I think guards who can hound the opposing ball handler, like, it's the NBA, every team in the playoffs for the most part has a very dangerous point guard. So you need guys like Killian who can hound them. And if he's knocking out threes, that helps. But I think one thing that's really helped his offensive surge is that we see him take those runners, or those short mid-range jumpers a lot in the first quarter, and they kind of gets him into a rhythm early. So having the ball in his hands has allowed him to kind of dictate, when he gets into a rhythm. He's not waiting on guys to play make for him, and I think that's helped. I think long term, you still probably need him to be good off ball as well. And if he can't get into the rhythm without the ball in his hands, then that's probably not ideal, in this case. Like we can let Killian run the show early, and then as we get into the game, I can have the ball in my hands more, which could also work. But he probably is a bench guard, so I'm just curious to see, if he's able to sustain these things down the road as, they get healthier. And I think the natural pecking order of the roster kind of solidifies itself, which it won't this year with K being out, obviously.
So that's my concern, because I've had people come at me, and I'm sure they're loving what you're saying, Laz, about, the reason his resurgence has come is being able to have the ball in his hands. But that almost concerns me because, like, he's not going to be good enough to take the ball out of Cade's hands, is he?
No.
And so if he's not good enough to take the ball out of Cade's hands, then essentially you're saying you have to bring him off the bench.
Yeah, that's fair. Or you say, like, he is, if he turns into a 24-year-old, like, starting level NBA guard, you flip him, right? On a presumably cheaper contract because he struggled for the first 2.25 years of his career, and you can get something valuable, like, for that, right? But yeah, I do think in the long term, he probably won't supplant, like, Jaden Ivey as the guy who needs to run next to Cade. And so, like, yeah, that makes him either a backup or, like, a future trade piece asset for sure.
And I don't want to trade him. Like, that's the thing. If he is who he's been for 15 games, I want him coming off my bench. Like, I think he's extremely valuable. And I feel like people think I'm diminishing what he's done, and I'm not. Like, I think it's been incredible. Like, 3 weeks ago, Amari and I were talking about something's got to change. This has not been good. And I want to make this point as well. And I'm interested if you agree. Anybody who had written him off completely, that was too early. But anybody who was critiquing Killian Hayes through 100 games was completely justified. He was a not good NBA basketball player in most games for his first 100 games. Would you agree with that?
Oh, definitely. We ran his season preview. Or no, it wasn't a season preview, but it might have been a season preview. But like the headline on Detroit Bad Boys was like Killian Hayes is bad. And like we had like Sean did the whole piece.
He got cooked for that,
He was like, guys who are that inefficient that early in their NBA careers generally don't turn it around, right? And like there was reason to believe that Killian would, because like he was a lot younger than most of those guys, and he was still able to play NBA minutes because of his defensive playmaking, despite being that inefficient a shooter. But like it was absolutely fair to critique Killian's play through the first 2 years of his career. I had to like very quietly hold all of my Killian stock, right? Like I wasn't selling, but like I definitely like had to like
advertising.
You were promoting that to everybody that you had. And that's where I'm at. And I guess at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. But I'm like, I feel like people who were questioning Killian are now getting called out. And it's like there was completely justifiable reasons to be questioning what Killian was as a player up to that point and whether he was going to turn it around or not based off the sample size we had seen, because we've seen young players not turn it around. Like that's always my argument is everybody's like, well, he's only 21. He's going to get better. I'm like, just because he's 21, he's going to get better. Some 21-year-olds don't get better. Some 20-year-olds flame out and their NBA careers are over and they go overseas or they go do something else. And I'm not saying I was on that camp, but I was getting somewhat close. I'm not going to lie. And I'm extremely happy I was wrong. But I don't think we should just crush people who were starting to questioning his NBA future a little bit.
No, that's fair. My big fear was that this development we are seeing would happen someplace else. Because the team would get frustrated, right? And like we talked a little bit about how now he has the ball in his hands and but also like he was never going to be good enough to take the ball out of Cade's hands. It's like, well, if you trade him to a team that doesn't have a Cade and he gets to play with the ball in his hands more and he figures this stuff out, like you're going to look back in 3 years and kick yourself, right? So it's like, I'm glad that this is happening now in Detroit. That he gets to develop like this, because now you get to make the decision about what to do with this like ascending NBA guard, as opposed to like having that decision taken out of your hands.
Omari, what has been the vibe? Like, have you noticed anything? Just Killian, Laz mentioned his confidence. We've talked about that. I think that's a huge part. Have you noticed like an organizational change in their confidence? Like the way Coach Casey talks about him, the way the other players talk about him, maybe the way Killian carries himself. Like you would have the best possible insight to this, and maybe you still don't have any, but have you noticed a change or an uptick in the kind of just the confidence around him and what he's been doing the last few weeks?
I think there was always still, some belief that Killian could figure some things out. They never really toyed with, or they tried not to toy with his role as much as they could, afford not to. He was still getting like the 17, 18 minutes a night, before Cade went out, obviously, and they were still, very vocal about giving him those opportunities. I think now that he's doing it, like there's certainly a lot of it's year 3. You want to see what he's doing now, and there's happiness for that. I think the question now is how much can he sustain it? I think Dwayne Casey has very purposefully still not put a lot of focus on the shooting. We talked to him about it, and, he said, I'm not concerned about the shooting. I'm not even worried about that. It's just quarterbacking this team, which, like, you do need them to do that, but you need them to score as well. And I think they're still sort of managing the expectations around him, because guys go through hot streaks, and, if he goes cold again, does he lose confidence again, this and that. So they want to create an environment where he is, I think, comfortable. So, obviously the vibe is not like, he finally made it. I think it's like he's playing well, and let's sustain this, as long as possible and see if it's something that he could, truly build on. So definitely a more positive vibe than, say, a month ago. But, also I think when the first 100 games weren't that great. You want to see how the next 100 games go before you give him the giant pat on the back and say you made it. So just sort of in a holding pattern, I think, right now, and kind of seeing what happens if he starts missing shots again.
We're going to see every opportunity. It seems like with Cade out for a while, he's going to get the ball in his hands. He's going to continue to progress and get those chances. And I'm with you, Laz. I'm glad we've seen it in Detroit. Whether he ends up here long term, whatever it ends up happening, this would have been really hard to see him doing for the Oklahoma City Thunder or something like that. I can't imagine what Pistons Twitter would be like if it was happening for another team. But we're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we're going to have a little fun. We're going to take a look into the future with a few different scenarios. What would cause this team to go full tank mode? What would cause this team to make the huge offseason trade? And what would cause us to say, what the heck just happened?
I'm Alyssa Robinson for the Detroit Free Press. When you wake up every morning, what's the first thing you do? Check your email? Me too. And when you sign up for our daily briefing newsletter, you'll get all the latest news sent directly to your inbox so you can wake up and be ready for the day. We also have newsletters about COVID-19 in Michigan, the latest entertainment headlines, as well as Woodward 248, a newsletter specifically for people living and working in Southeast Oakland County. And don't forget about automotive headlines and all the latest news from our Michigan sports teams. We have a newsletter for every personality and preference. Just head to freep.com/newsletters to sign up for any one of these great options and more.
All right, we are back with segment 3. And as Bryce alluded to, we're going to play the future game where Bryce is going to lay out some scenarios, discuss how it could happen, how likely it is, and if it's best. And Bryce, I believe we're leading off with some tanking scenarios, right?
This is probably the most likely. I don't know. I'm interested to see what you guys think. But of the scenarios, so again, it's the full tank mode. It's the second one will be, what about the big trade at the end of this in the offseason? And then the final one will be like, did this team really just make the play-in? So let's start with the tank. What happens for this team to essentially, whenever I come out in April, Omari, me to watch the Motor City Cruise essentially playing the Miami Heat and the Brooklyn Nets on those nights? So what's the scenario that this could happen, Laz?
Cade Cunningham gets the shin surgery and is out for the rest of the season. That seems pretty straightforward, right? The on-ramp to Victor Wembanyama is like right in front of us. I think that would be like because that path is so apparent. I think like the expectation for that is like pretty high. Like that's like a 80%, 85% thing. But the thing you would hope for in that scenario is that they are losing games like they've been losing games over the last couple of weeks, not like they were losing games like at the beginning of the season where they were losing every game by 20 points, right?
Omari, what is the path to, as Laz says, Victor Wembanyama or possibly Scoot Henderson or Amin Thompson?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just as Laz said. I think you lose Cade for the year. That kind of pops the, we could be a playing team bubble. Unless the team, like miraculously, like let's say Jaden Ivey hits another level and Jalen Duren hits another level and they still have depth. I think we've seen over the last 3 weeks that they've actually been a little bit more competitive with Cade out of the lineup. And, like that when they got over Dallas was, probably a game that they lose by 20 points a month ago. So, we're seeing competitive losses, and I think we could continue to see that. But I think without Cade, without sort of like your go-to closer, like Lee Ball Handler and stuff, that definitely caps the ceiling for this team. And then we just see the kind of what happened last year where you get to March and then you start to wind guys down. Like you're missing a week with a sore foot or whatever, a sore neck, like just the random injury report stuff you see, like, in like March every year. I think the OKC Thunder had like 25 guys out in like March. But yeah, I mean, this is the Wemby draft, and, I think that's just probably the likely outcome at this point, like bearing this incredible surge out of nowhere. You just see the team wind down over the course of the year and kind of get into position for that.
Laz, at this point, is this the best course of action? Is the best course just to sit Cade for the rest of the year, eventually set all the vets, I don't think you have to trade Burks and Boyan, because I think no matter what scenario we're talking, Boyan and Burks can be part of the future in some way into the offseason, but you got to set those guys if you really want to lose games because they can straight get buckets. You go full young guys, you're playing Buddy, you're playing Braxton. Is that the best course of action for the rest of the season?
Yes. No. Yes, I think Cade getting the surgery, which is what I think eventually happens, like, yes, that is the best scenario, because that is the scenario that gets you the healthiest version of Cade Cunningham, which is like what you need for long-term success. As for the rest of it, as for like, all of a sudden, Boyan and Burks come down with like vetitis for the last like month or so of the season. It's like, I don't know if that stuff is necessary in a way that other teams like leverage, because again, like, this team is pretty bad. And I don't like, even if Boyan and Burks play, I still think you lose enough games to give yourself a good enough shot at the prospects you want in this year's draft. And the other thing I worry about, though, is like, if you lose Burks and you lose Boyan, and all of a sudden, like, now Killian's swinging the ball to Hami or Kevin Knox a lot more.
Hey, we're Kevin Knox supporters on the Pistons Pulse.
Kevin had a really good 2 games, and he had a really nice corner 3 against Memphis. But yeah, like, he's not bogey. Right?
He's not bogey. He is not bogey.
And so if he's got to be bogey all of a sudden, like, does that impact Killian's development? Does that impact Jaden Ivey's like playmaking? Like, does that have negative knock-on effects that you like don't really want?
Amari, what do you think? Is this the best scenario to play out for the Pistons as they essentially kind of go into this tank? They set the vets. Laz brings up some good points about the progression of those guys, those young players the last couple months.
I think so. Like, they're still in rebuild mode. So, season goes on. If Cade's out, then, see what you got from the young guys, right? Like, maybe it'll be Braxton Key and Buddy Boeheim season, by the end of the year. Like, we always, like, they've always had, two-way guys who do fun things, right? Like, we saw Tyler Cook a couple years ago.
Do either of those
Frank
two
Jackson.
do fun things? Do either
Frank
of those?
Jackson.
No, those guys did fun things. Do Braxton Key or Buddy Boeheim do fun things?
Well, we haven't seen Buddy, so we don't know.
He doesn't. He does not. The answer is he does not.
Buddy doesn't play in the G League.
Thank you. Braxton is a very good player, and I respect his game. But to call it exciting or fun would not be the descriptive words I would use.
I think you underestimate Pistons fans. I think Pistons fans are rooting for a lot of guys who actually played quite disgusting basketball. So, which Braxton Key does not do. He does not play disgusting basketball. So I think fun is relative. I've been watching the Pistons for a long time. I've been, I've dialed with the Pistons Twitter for a long time, dating back since college. I've seen this fan base rally around some really, just like sick players. So don't rule it out. But yeah, I think that's just like the natural progression for a rebuilding season. Continue to take stock of your young guys and, see what they can do. They're already sort of in that pattern now. I think we were talking about Duran playing G League games over the summer, and he hasn't even sniffed the G League. It's been a rotation piece all season, so I think they're still prioritizing that.
Okay, let's move to the next one. I think this one will be a lot of fun. So this scenario, guys, is the big offseason trade. And so do you think something like this can happen? If it does, how does it happen? Is it likely? And would it be good? So I'm going to throw out a few names here. Michael Porter Jr., Brandon Ingram, Keldon Johnson, you mentioned earlier. So obviously we got different level of quote-unquote stars. Your guy, Laz, RJ Barrett. We got Pat Williams, Lou Dort, like some borderline stars, guys that are stars, or maybe guys you think in a new environment could become stars. Do we see that playing out this offseason, Laz?
Man, I hope so. I'm looking at the standings now. The Pelicans are second in the West, so
good,
Brandon
right?
Ingram is not going anywhere. Yeah. MPJ be kind of interesting. I wonder if Troy Weaver wants MPJ in the locker room. I've heard, you hear stuff secondhand about MPJ, and you wonder if that guy's a culture fit in Detroit. I love RJ Barrett. I think he would be a culture fit in Detroit. I think he is the type of guy who he's like a Saddiq in that he's a guy who just like works really hard at his game and then goes home and like wakes up and like thinks about how he can work even harder at his game. However, RJ shooting 28% from 3 on the season. And so like maybe he's a little bit too much like Saddiq Bey.
He's been a tad inefficient this season.
Yeah, and that's been the knock on him for his entire career is just the true shooting has always been not good. But he's made himself into a passable free throw shooter. He's made himself into like a passable finisher around the rim. It's just the 3-point shooting is not great. I like RJ Barrett. I readily accept RJ Barrett, not everyone's cup of tea. Patrick Williams. We do know that Troy Weaver loved Patrick Williams going into that year's draft. We also know that the Chicago Bulls are 9-14 right now and not doing too hot.
The Chicago Bulls have blow it up written all over them. Like, if DeMar DeRozan is still on that roster at the trade deadline, I will be shocked based off what we're seeing right now.
Yeah, they just paid Zach LaVine too, and so it's just like, can you blow it up? You just put it together, but yeah. So I would love to extend the hand of friendship to Arturos Karnisovas and be like, hey, absolutely. Like, yeah, Saddiq Bey, much more established NBA player, will definitely help you make the playoff play-in run you so deeply crave. It's like, sure, we'll take Patrick Williams off your hands. Why not? Why not? I'd totally be in favor of something like that. But I think the thing you run into with this is like, what are the Pistons giving away, right? Like that's the asset bases. I don't know who fans want to trade for some of these guys, and that's always the tricky part.
When Wes put this together, part of this trade was the Pistons don't end up with like a top 5 pick. They end up with a mid-lottery pick, and you actually end up packaging that with said one other young player or a vet or whatever you would need. And that could net you a pretty good player. And, our list is somewhat limited right now because we don't know how some of these teams' seasons are going to play out. But, the idea is you bring in probably a 3, which is the hole in the starting lineup when Bojan is no longer filling that role. And you fill it with a guy that you feel like is either an established star or is going to become a star. So, Amari, what do you think about the possibility of I don't want to say a big trade, but somewhat of a noteworthy trade in the offseason for the Pistons, acquiring some sort of high-level wing, small forward type player?
Like, I would say it's likely, but I think they are in perfect position to do that. I think that I just question that the front office want a 4th year of being in like full rebuild mode when Cade is in year 3 and you've extended, I'm sure at least 1 or 2 of the guys that you drafted in 2020, if not all 3. And you also have a lot of cap space, so you can take in a lot of money, and you just have all these avenues you could pursue to kind of rapidly improve the roster, which I kind of compare to what the Atlanta Hawks did back in 2020 when they went on and got Gallinari and all these high-level role guys and really put a squad around Trae Young, and they were like, it's time to be good, and then they made the Eastern Conference Finals the next year. Like you mentioned, you have teams like the Chicago Bulls who look like they probably just blow it up. Now, whether teams decide to blow it up and try to get draft capital in February, or if they kind of hold on and make moves next summer, remains to be seen. But from the Pistons standpoint, like, they are extremely well positioned to make a run after one of those guys, whether it's MPJ or Barrett or whoever, should they wish to do so. You'll have Cade back. You'll have your core sort of intact. You could keep Bogey, and then he comes back another year, and you can pick up Alec Burks' team option. And now, you really have a lot of depth up and down the roster, and your young guys are all older and ready to make leaps forward. So, I think this team is absolutely positioned to make a big splash. I think they've been setting their chips up to eventually do something of that sort. And I think next offseason makes a lot of sense.
Well, and I think they have a lot of tradable contracts. Like, everybody talks about the Marvin Bagley III contract, but it's $12 million. That's a very, that falls right in the realm of a pretty tradable contract. Bojan is an extremely tradable contract. I'm not saying you want to trade Bojan, but if he has to be a part of the trade to get the type of player we're talking about, $20 million, and then the next year is only guaranteed for 2. Burks and Noel both on the $10 million. So you have a lot of really nice contracts, some younger guys. I just, like you guys said, I think they're in position that if that player is out there, I think actually where it becomes more likely is if you landed Victor Wembanyama, then you go all out. Like, go ahead and let's go get this other player as well. I think the interesting one that Wes always loves to bring up to me, let's go ahead and let's get into it a little bit. If they land number 2, Laz, because there's going to be instant conversation about Scoot Henderson, and I love Scoot Henderson, and this is the complete opposite of I think Scoot is so good you put the ball in his hands and you ask Cade to play off the ball, and that may be blasphemy, but that's how I feel about Scoot right now. But Wes has brought up, you package number 2 with a couple other guys and you go get this star level wing. What do you think about that? Where are you at on Scoot?
I love Scoot. I wonder about giving Scoot away. That feels like a huge mistake. I wonder about like taking a Thompson twin over Scoot just because you took Jaden Ivey like last year and
I
Cade the year
couldn't do
before.
it, Laz.
Yeah, I probably couldn't either. Yeah, that would be insanely tough. You would be able to get like there are a lot of teams who would give you a lot for the chance to develop Scoot into like the all NBA guard everybody thinks he's going to end up being. That would That's not something I've given a whole lot of thought to. My full expectation is that we finish fourth and like fall to seventh and end up with like, I don't know, Keontae George or something.
That's funny. Wes and I talked about Keontae George today. Brandon Miller's the name. That's a name to watch because he's a really nice fit if they fall outside of the top three. And we'll talk draft later. Let's finish on a positive note, a Pistons winning more games type of note, guys. This is the what the heck just happened? How did this go down? The Pistons somehow end up in the play-in game, Omari, at the end of this season. What has to happen for Detroit to make a run and end up in the play-in based off where they're sitting right now?
You know, like I think that path is like really, really hard, but I think that, you know, Ivy, you know, he makes a leap like we've seen. It seems like there's always at least one highly pick guard every year who kind of catches fire around February or March and closes the season strong. And, you know, like that could be Ivy. Killian continues the pace he's been on. Bogey continues to be Bogey. Burks continues to be Burks. Bagley continues his play. And then I think sort of a lot of that would kind of hinge on Duran becoming a very, very credible rim protector because a lot of their wins have been shootouts because they can't defend anybody right now. So I think you would have to see offensively, they've actually, you know, improved dramatically. I think defensively, you would probably need to see a leap, and that almost entirely hinges on Jalen Duran doing some approximation of a Robert Williams or, you know, insert athletic rim protecting big here impersonation, and like he actually becomes a credible rim protector, which could happen. You know, I wouldn't rule it out. I think he's been pretty advanced for an 18/19-year-old so far. So again, I think it would still require a look in front of him. Like you would need, like for whatever reason, a handful of teams who are in front of them right now to just kind of fall off. You know, maybe the Wizards decide it's time to trade Bradley Beal, and like who else is in front of him? Like everybody's in front of them.
The
like,
Knicks.
Only teams who are the Knicks. Yeah, the Knicks.
Miami, Brooklyn. Like the Knicks aren't even in the play-in game right now at 11-13.
Yeah, so maybe the Knicks are like, all right, let's trade. Like, even though we, you know, parted the Sun and Stars to sign Jalen Brunson, and then it's just like, all right, this isn't working, so we're going to trade Randall, and we're going to do this and that. But you need teams in front of them to kind of part the path for the Pistons to get into that discussion, because even an improved Pistons team at this point, the gap's probably too big for them to really make that type of surge. So it would be best case scenario, Pistons improve defensively and go on the run, and teams in front of them also, for whatever reason, are no longer in the run at all.
Laz, make the argument for the Pistons to make the play-in game this year so we can record it, put it on Twitter, and give it no context.
Absolutely. So the thing you need first is for Indiana to give up, right?
Yes.
Like Indiana right now is, I think they're like a game above 500. Like before the season, if you asked me like who the worst team in the NBA was, like I might have said the Pacers. And so like you need them to be like, hey, like we won a shot at Vic. Like this has been fun, but like we would like to not be playoff contenders now. So you need them to drop out. Then you need like Cade to come back. Omari made the point I was going to make, which is why he's really good at his job, is that like the jump you would need is on the defensive end, right? Like they are already a competent enough offensive team that, you know, big strides from Marvin Bagley, big strides from like Alec Burks or something defensively.
Jaden Ivey.
Jaden Ivey being an impact defender in a way that he flashes occasionally would be huge for this team. You know, strides from Saddiq Bey. Saddiq Bey has quietly been not a very good defensive player. And so big strides from him on that end would also make a huge difference. The other thing is obviously like they lay hands on Cade Shin and he's good. And then all of a sudden you just like throw Cade back into the lineup. And like with the added ball handling pressure, Killian's like, oh, great. Finally, I just get to run the second unit, which is everything I've ever wanted to do. And like he continues his wild stretch of play. And like, yeah, it's that puts that on the table, but it would still be difficult because they're already like so far behind. Right. You mentioned we mentioned the Knicks and the Wizards, like even the Hornets have, like, LaMelo's played like 3 games this year, right? If LaMelo comes back, like, they're probably going to try for the play-in tournament as well, because like that's the expectations they have for themselves going into the season. So you would need a lot to go right, but it starts with like the Pacers being like, yeah, we don't want Miles Turner anymore.
And the Brooklyn Nets have to, decombust and all of that stuff, which is that one's probably possible. Who knows? You never know what's going on in Brooklyn. But yeah, that was fun. I was glad Wes put that one in there because it's fun to dream at times. I think we all know that the first scenario we talked about is maybe the first two. Maybe we get both. Maybe we get the tank and a high draft pick and we get the big trade for a star and we really see this roster come together. But man, Laz, I know we got to get you back to the family, that one amazing kid that you do have. Thank you so much for joining us. We had a lot of laughs. We enjoyed it. I wish we could have got some more food talk, but we had the outline full. But the next time we have you on, we'll definitely get into it. So let everybody know where they can listen to the podcast, find your work, everything you got going on.
Bryce, Omari, thank you so much for having me on. I truly appreciate it. If people want to follow me on Twitter, they can do so at LazChance. That's at LazChance. And if they want to listen to my podcast, the Detroit Bad Boys podcast, they can do so on whatever podcast platform that they are listening to this podcast on. I did see everybody's Spotify Wraps. I was hurt that the Detroit Bad Boys podcast wasn't in people's Spotify Wrap, but it's cool. It's cool. We take a long summer hiatus, right? We don't record a lot of episodes from June to November, basically. So like, yeah, it's good. I'm not mad. It's okay.
We're gonna get Laz on the Spotify Wrap next year. We're gonna speak it into existence. Laz, you do great work like everybody else at Detroit Bad Boys. And always good to have you on the pod. We have some Michigan State synergy. Today some State News synergy. Which is always good. Like I've been talking Pistons with Laz since like 2012, which is crazy. We're sitting here on the Pistons podcast, which is awesome. So yeah, I mean, big thanks again for joining us. We're gonna have you on here again soon. And I'll go ahead and close this out. Shout out to our editors, Kerry Jr. II, and Robin Chan, who recently joined us as audio producer recently. And we should have been shouting you out for like the last month. So
yeah, major error on my part, Robin. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, but we got you this time, and we'll get you from here on out. Our executive producer, Anjanette Delgado, and our sports editor, Kirkland Crawford. Also, shout out to Wes Davenport. We'll talk to you all next week.